I'm Jim Check. You're watching Kelowna Now. I'm here with
Renee Merrifield.
lots and lots and lots. Like we don't even have enough. If we stayed here all
I
day, we
know.
wouldn't have enough time to talk
I
about
know.
everything that's happened in the past, whatever, 24
I
hours.
literally feel like we need to be like the Mike Smith show where he just goes for like 3 hours
3 hours.
and tries to, get of what's happening in politics.
Well, we can hit the highlights, and for sure, the lead story has got to be Donald Trump inaugurated yesterday.
I could not believe how many people were watching it.
Yeah.
It was fascinating to me to see how many were tuned in from the get-go. In fact, I attended a meeting yesterday morning in Vancouver, and it was at 8:30, and people around the table were already asking how much they had tuned in that morning to see what was going on.
It is amazing because in Canadian politics, even when we're doing our own thing, we don't get that much Canadian response. And even the other side of that, Joe Biden's last interview on MSNBC had such low viewership.
Oh, he's so irrelevant, though. No. He is so irrelevant, and what a poor ending to his presidency. The pardoning of thousands of people and pardoning his own family members. It was pretty disgusting.
Donald Trump's inauguration speech, though, I watched Kamala and Joe Biden squirm because it was a tough one for sure to have to sit there and take that. I'm sure Kamala had a pretty sour looking face for sure.
I don't know how you could not. And if they didn't have some facial expression or some reaction, I'd almost be more concerned about them in terms of their hearts. It was a tough loss, and for them and for the things that Trump is basically, throwing their nose in, it's a difficult time for them. So I appreciated that they were there and trying to be as stoic as possible.
So a couple of things happened, though, that were kind of interesting, other than, I would say, Ian and I talked about it. The French and the English do a lot bigger pomp when they do their celebrations. And that, it was still kind of like in a room, and it was kind of, but again, lots of people watching.
Okay, you can't take this inauguration, though, was the first one that was inside since whatever year it was. Yeah. Usually there is this huge parade and this huge pomp and ceremony that takes place, and people lined up all the way along the parade route, and then, at the actual venue, it's like, everyone lining the sides, and it's pretty spectacular as well. This was very different, had a very different tenor, had a much more less traditional, less I don't know, a less good feel to it. It was just much more much more subdued, I guess, as it were.
Yeah, and then he went into the office there, and he started writing or signing executive orders, and he had the press in there, and that's something that's been missing in the U.S. politics, is actually access to the president or the vice president for that matter. And they asked one of the reporters, Peter Ducey, I think from Fox, like, how many times has you guys done this in the past 4 years with Joe Biden? He's like, zero.
Yeah, it's going to be a different time. He has promised more transparency. He has promised more freedom of speech. He made good by that on his very first day. I think you're going to see that. I think you're also seeing that his closest allies right now are ones that are, fighting for that free speech, and anyone who isn't about that is kind of being, put by the wayside. We talked about Meta and Mark Zuckerberg and how he's saying now, I'm, throwing all the guardians and fact checkers off because they were too narrow and too left wing. It's like, oh my goodness, like, yeah, okay, sure you are, but it's because you've got a different president in place.
Yeah, it's kind of like completely different worlds. Like you watch MSNBC or CNN, and they portrayed it as a dictator taking over. And like even accusing Elon Musk of being a Nazi at the event, and I would say Elon Musk is, and even the ADL came out and said absolutely not. And then like the Fox obviously portraying it as like freedom has arrived kind of thing, and it's somewhere that the journalists have to just like start reporting the stories instead of political nonsense, right? Because I didn't see anything there that looked like a dictator taking over. It was somebody that was actually answering the press as he's signing executive orders and going through each of the orders and allowing questions to be asked of them.
Yeah, and I think that's a strong caution for the public in general. At least in the U.S., they are unabashedly right wing, left wing, and they sort of tout those predispositions when they're talking, when they assert themselves. What I would say about Canada is it's a little bit more nuanced, and everyone says that they're really trying to be centrist, in terms of the media, and we know that not to be true as well. I caution anyone, and I know that it takes a lot of work to do so, but wherever possible, if you can listen to the live press conference, if you can go back to all of the words that were said rather than the soundbite that was taken or the headline that was created, I think we as citizens would be better off, and we would be far more informed. I think what's really dangerous is when we allow the media to sculpt our own bias. And I'll give a great example. I had heard a lot about Danielle Smith before she took over for the UCP party. And honestly, I wasn't a fan. I wasn't a fan at all. It wasn't until I watched a 2-hour interview with her. And I watched it going in saying, I want to write down everything that I disagree with and kind of go head to head with her in my mind. And at the end of the 2 hours, I actually went back and rewound it and listened to it again because I couldn't find things that I was in disagreement with. She's very logical. She's very thoughtful. She presents very well. She's very intelligent. She has her facts and figures. And in a lot of ways, she's been very poorly portrayed in the media as she is right now.
Yeah, they portrayed her. Some of our media, national media, portrayed her as the villain, as has the Liberal Party and the NDP. But when she ran, and we'll go back to Trump. She ran on an Alberta First mandate. That's her electorate voted for her on Alberta First, and most of the country don't put Alberta First. I mean, that's been their biggest fight. So she ran on Alberta First. Donald Trump ran on America First, and that's what the American voters wanted. Can we say that we have a federal government right now that has put Canada first over the last 9 years?
No, and it's been a country that's forced Alberta to go south to actually export its oil and gas sector and develop the prosperity that they have. I would say that the Energy East pipeline should be in play right now. That would allow us to get oil and gas to Europe and to Asia and actually really make a difference in global emissions if we want to talk about an environmental agenda. But instead, the East is very content to take those equalization payments, but not content to actually have the oil and gas shipped to them. And, here's where I really want to draw attention. It's not that they don't need it, right? I mean, every single day they have oil tankers that come up the St. Laurent River that literally are bringing oil and gas from other places other than Canada. Yeah. So, for us, it's like why we haven't looked at our entire resource sector and all that we bring and all of the different assets and what each province can really do, whether it's manufacturing in Ontario or whether it's the natural resources of basically Saskatchewan, Alberta, and BC. What we haven't done is really looked at all of that and said, how are we going to maximize this for Canadians' prosperity? That has not been done. That is what Trump is doing. That is what Obama did. Obama was one of the biggest, really protectionist presidents that we'd seen in a very long time. And he wanted to get to energy independence for the U.S., which is why he had so much oil and gas production increase under his 8 years of presidency. So we need a leader like that right now. And right now we have a void of leadership, which is allowing Trump to really have his way with us in whatever way he sees fit.
I thought I woke up on a different planet yesterday as I listened to Vasi Kapelas from CTV, great journalist, by the way.
She is.
She was interviewing Jagmeet Singh, who's now saying Canadian resources are our number one part. And then so she called him out and says, you voted against pipelines. Yes. Numerous times. And he's like, well, we need to move forward. He didn't want to talk about that, right? So, do you know what I mean? He accepts no responsibility for what they've done to our resource sector. And now, Liberals and NDP are saying Canada's biggest asset is our natural resources. Duh.
I have said it over and over again. Do not believe what a politician says. Believe what they do. They need to be judged by their actions and by the impact that those actions have on the population. if I take this, like Jagmeet, he is saying whatever he needs to try and flail because he knows that an election is coming imminently. We saw that happen with Trudeau. We're seeing that happen with Chrystia Freeland and Mark Carney. Carney is the carbon tax king and, has gone on record saying we need a price on pollution, yada, yada, yada. Chrystia Freeland's voted for it 48 times. You can't get more of a record than that. And so for now to see them backing off of it, that's only because Pierre Poilievre has said, let's have a carbon tax election. And so they're trying to deflate that somewhat, but do not believe what they say. David Eby came out and said, I'm going to give you $1,000. I'm going to do all the, what is he saying now? We can't give you $1,000. That's going to be off the table. The one person, and she's getting absolutely hammered for it right now, the one premier across the country who is doing what she said she was going to do is Danielle Smith. She is going to the U.S. She is trying to build that trade relationship so that Alberta's prosperity is not threatened. And God bless her for doing it right now, because honestly, we do not have another leader who is as strong as what she is doing.
We definitely, and just from a common sense perspective, we need a federal government and a leader that puts Canada first. I think that is paramount, and we don't have that. Chrystia Freeland wants to lead Canada. Her interview on CBC, though, when asked about the carbon tax, because now everybody's going at the carbon tax, she said she didn't really agree with it. She went along to get along.
Yeah, then she's weak.
Yeah,
right.
Either bullied by the feminist.
Well, you know what? Either way, she's weak. Yeah. Because we saw what the response was of truly strong women. Truly strong women will just get up and leave. Yeah. Truly strong women are so confident in their skill set and in their abilities to go and do something different. They do not need to sit in the presence of a feminist and who is bullying you into voting for a carbon tax. I'm sorry. You've got to have more morals and more principles than that. And I think that just shows her as an incredibly weak MP, an incredibly weak finance minister, if you are just under the edict of your premier or prime minister.
You said something about Mark Carney being the king of the carbon tax.
And the heir apparent of the Liberals.
The kingpin. And I think maybe, and I'm going to say this, and I'm trying to say this as nice as possible, Chrystia Freeland and Justin Trudeau may have been useful fools for Mark Carney, because he's in the background as the puppet master for a number of years, running Brookfield Asset Management and really working the carbon tax thing. And then if you go and look on Brookfield Asset Management, they were called out because they were claiming higher carbon credits than they were actually doing. So it's kind of looks like, and the Net Zero Alliance has fallen apart.
We are looking at, someone asked me the other day, why would Mark Carney want to go into politics? He's got such a successful career outside of politics. And I said, does he? Yeah. Does he? Everything that he has built and constructed based around an ideology of green, of the green economy and the new economy is literally falling apart. Why? Because nobody can make money doing it. And if you can't make money...
They were fudging the books on the carbon credits.
Exactly. And that is a very, very dangerous place for him to be in. We just saw the largest financial institutions in Canada back away from his carbon agenda and from his...
That was after all the American ones, JP Morgan's and
exactly,
all the big ones,
Morgan Stanley,
and all
BlackRock, yeah.
And then, of course, I think 4 of the big Canadian banks have already backed away, and there's probably the rest will fall. I think it's the whole thing is collapsed anyway.
It is, and so that's why Carney is trying now to okay, well, maybe I can influence Canada for it. If you look at Carney's reputation globally, it's not as favorable as what the Canadians see him as. And in large part, I think Canadians see him positively because he served under a conservative prime minister who actually could balance off some of those more left-wing agendas and really keep it in check and come to a happy balance and a middle that Canadians were very content with. So I think that our memory of his influence is a little bit misleading, and I think that I think he is moving for that coronation of the leader of the Liberal Party, but I don't know as though he'll ever be our prime minister because I think an election will get called before that.
When you're hiring a CEO of a company, CEO of Canada, Mark Carney, do you not check references? Because the references aren't very good. The UK, the former UK prime minister, she had not very good things to say about Mark Carney, and she said it would be a big mistake for Canada to employ him.
Yeah, I agree. There's definitely been a lot of of pushback globally, they don't see Mark Carney as being the Canadian leader that we need right now. And that whole Canada First agenda will not be the case under a Carney.
Yeah, he identifies as a European when asked that question too.
I saw that. As a European.
Yeah, so a lot of stuff, but let's just move back to Trump for a second. A few things that he stepped out of like right away. One is strengthening the border. That was what he said he was going to do, and he's done that.
Yeah.
And then there was Stephen Smith. He came out and said a bunch of things. He said, like, it's really tragic what's going on the Mexican border. There's people crying right now because they can't get across. But he didn't blame it on Trump. He blamed it on Biden and Harris and saying, you let 14 million people into the country with open borders, and you brought this calamity onto those people because we should have a legal immigration process, not wide open borders. And it's, it's caused all this pain and suffering. Stepped out of the WHO. But he didn't say permanently. He said, like, they're paying $500 million. Like, he'll look at it. Stepped out of DEI. Says he abolished DEI. Says there's only 2 genders. And then also the Paris Accord. And Stephen Jabot lost his mind about that, right? Yeah. But he's not losing his mind on Chrystia Freeland and Mark Carney about stepping away from the carbon tax. But he is losing his mind on Donald Trump.
It's an easy lightning rod for the angst. Right? I mean, they're definitely going to have to step more to the center throughout an election time. But again, don't believe what they're saying right now during this election season. Believe what they've done. And what they've done is literally almost bankrupt Canadian citizens with a taxation structure and policy that has been so vicious, and a spending frivolity that we have never seen before in recorded history. So that is what we can truly judge, Chrystia Freeland, but all of the Liberals by, and Mark Carney trying to say that he didn't have anything to do with it is simply false. He has been, as you said, maybe the puppet master, at least one of the puppeteers that has been working in the background to all of this policy that has really arrived Canada to where we are today.
Yeah, the former UK Prime Minister said that carbon tax stuff that Carney was pushing in Britain has really put Britain in economic crisis, and still is.
And it does.
Yeah.
And it does.
And it's done that to Canada too. It's robbed us of our natural wealth that instead of like taxing the individual. Well, we have to tax the individual because we're not accessing our natural wealth that we have here in Canada.
Yeah, and also, I mean, I do understand why, why we're stepping away, or why Trump is stepping away from the Paris Accord, and there are some flaws. One of the flaws is how they actually count emissions and how they count up your carbon and your carbon equivalencies. And I mean, really, it's because it's based in the country of origin or the center of origin rather than or production rather than consumption. So you can be one of the largest consumers of all of these things that actually have very large footprints, but as long as you didn't make it, you're okay. That's one of Canada's issues right now. Canada has, really an amazing abundance of resources that are lower carbon emitting than anywhere else in the world. And yet we can't actually celebrate that because we still are producing them. And so by producing them, we're, and shipping them off of our borders, it counts for us. As our emissions, rather than counting in the where they're being consumed, and nor do we get the value of the offset where we offset coal for LNG. We don't get the value of that offset either. So there are some huge flaws in the Paris Accord, and we need to actually take another look at it.
The Europeans were actually begging for our LNG when the Ukraine war started, and we basically told them that we're not going to sell them that, but we will sell them hydrogen when hydrogen hasn't really worked out. I mean, that's like saying, like we've got something way in the future that we're just developing. It's like a stall tactic, really, because hydrogen it doesn't look like it's going to amount to much. I mean, I've followed hydrogen quite a bit, but our resources, at least this election cycle, they're saying what they need to say right now, because the Liberals now need you. They now need your vote, right? So now they're pretending to listen. I say pretending to listen because they haven't listened for 9 years. No. And it's tough. Let's focus on BC, because Brenda Bailey, BC's new finance minister, says that they're going to target Republican red states. They're just. Do you think poking the bear in the eye is going to help? and especially with, like BC saying one thing, Doug Ford saying another thing, and Danielle Smith actually down there trying to work it for the betterment of Canada.
Yeah, the only one who has a clear, strong focus and clear, strong goals about the protecting the prosperity of its citizens is Danielle Smith. Brenda Bailey saying that they're going to punish red states over blue states, which is Republicans over Democrats, is probably one of the most ridiculous things I've ever heard. And only
juvenile.
It actually speaks to what they want, which is to protect ideology rather than to protect prosperity for British Columbians. BC is in a bad state. Our inflation rate was much higher than the rest of the country in this last month. We have outpaced the rest of Canada. I want to say it's about 19 out of 23 months of the last 2 years. So we are in a bad place right now. BC's economy is slated to barely, make half to 0.9% of a GDP this year, and most economists are predicting next year is not going to be that much better. Our economic forecast basically says that there isn't as much revenue, there isn't as much taxes. We're seeing businesses go under left, right, and center, whether it's Crafty Kitchen downtown or whether it's 3 other brew houses. So, we are looking at a really bad economic forecast for BC. And in light of this, her answer and her response as our finance minister is to go and punish ideology, not to fight for prosperity, but to actually somehow promote BC as this far left-wing entity, and to poke the leader of the actual country that holds this, $69 billion, tariff impact.
Yeah. Stick a stick in his eye.
That makes absolutely no sense. No sense whatsoever. And it's it's absurd. And if you put that into playground terms, you would it's laughable. It's like telling the bully, rather than going out and trying to figure out why the bully is mad and why the bully needs what they need and how you can reach an agreement with the bully, you're literally going to tell the bully, well, you had bad parenting and you think wrong. It's that's just absurd. It's absurd, and it's not going to have an impact positively for British Columbians.
So you said a couple of really important things there. The taxation revenues have fallen from our resource sector in British Columbia. And that's where we should be getting a lot of our stuff to fund our services.
And our businesses. Yeah. And our businesses. Yeah. Corporate taxes are down as well.
And so instead, we just look to squeeze the taxpayer, the individual again. BC introduced another new tax, per se, on Airbnbs, a new registration service that you have to register your Airbnb not only with your municipality and pay a registration fee and a license fee and all that stuff. Now you have to register with the provincial government because I guess they don't trust the municipalities. And it says it's to stop illegal Airbnbs. Why would an illegal Airbnb register? Does that make sense to you? So it's just I'm an illegal Airbnb. Oh, there's a registry. I better register.
Yeah. And again, it's those that do things by the book and those that are, following, this is not going to track them at all. This is not going to find them. Or sorry, the ones that are doing everything right are the ones that are going to register, and the ones that are doing everything wrong are not registering in the first place. So it's a ridiculous and shameless cash grab. And it's one of those examples of the death of 1,000 cuts that this government has us under. We're already seeing the Craigslist and the Kijijis, and the provincial government said we're going to be mining all of that to find out where these bad actors are and what they're doing, et cetera, et cetera. But again, it's ridiculous. And if you look at our inflation numbers for the last month, it was also cited that hotel rates are one of the reasons that we're so
56% up in December.
Now,
Taylor Swift is a big part of that.
And I wanted to mention that Taylor Swift being a part of that. However, and I say however, we have another province that also had Taylor Swift concerts and did not experience the same inflationary pressures. Why? Because they don't have the same Airbnb rules. No. So they had Airbnbs that people could stay in. And I know people who flew out from Kelowna to Toronto for that concert because they could stay in an Airbnb, and the hotels in Vancouver, the Holiday Inn was charging $2,000 a night. So it's an absolute ridiculous carte blanche that we've given our hoteliers to charge whatever they want, however they see fit. And this last summer, if anyone had company that came into town that was trying to stay at any of our hotels, they can realize very quickly that even in the absolute off seasons or shoulder seasons, our hoteliers were absolutely price gouging. And if you look, their occupancy was only up by 3%, but their revenues were way up over the course of this last year. And that's simply because now they can charge whatever they want because they're not competing against Airbnbs.
I interviewed Brenda Bailey when she was the Jobs and Innovation Minister, and I asked her this question about the Airbnbs, and she said, Jim, look, like it's mostly corporations that own these Airbnbs. I know of one that has 27 Airbnbs. These are big companies, and we need to, go after them because they're, taking away rentals. I interviewed then, I said, well, I should talk to the Airbnb, the head of Airbnb in Canada. And he said, that's not true.
It's not true.
90% of the Airbnbs, the person has one. And it's an investment property by somebody that's got some money. And then they've taken that and they invested into real estate, which is really investing into Canada. So it's the small person that they're really going after, but they bring out that one story. And the most troubling part about this whole thing, and he outlined it, the reports that the government is relying on are being funded by the BC Hotel Association.
They are. Absolutely.
And then,
he's correct.
I said, do they take your reports? And I did ask that of David Eby and they deny it.
And you don't even have to take their reports. Don't take the Airbnb reports. Take Stats Canada report. Stats Canada came out this summer and said the Airbnb restrictions have had a 0.3% impact on rentals. Why? Because they're not actually going into the long-term rental pool, and they're not good long-term rentals. Like, you take a 5-bedroom house on the water here, that's not a good long-term
who's renting
rental.
That? What for?
Like it's just, so they've actually done the analysis, and Stats Canada has said it's had a huge impact on tourism and a negligible impact on our long-term rentals. But what the BC government is trying to do is actually push forward and try and nickel and dime and grab as much money as they possibly
David
can.
Eby in my interview, did allude to that we have to protect the hotel's investment in. And I'm just like, what?
So who's in the pocket of the big corps now, right?
Like, you know what I mean? Like, we have to protect the hotels and then not like the small Canadian investor or whatever, like mom and pop that has one Airbnb.
No, they're villains.
Yeah, apparently. And
they're villains. David Eby said that over and over again in the House.
That has been kind of the MO of the Liberals and the NDPs over this past 9 years or so. Always pick a villain to divide us. And I don't want to go through COVID, but there was a lot of villains there. But right now, the villain, we'll kind of circle back, the villain is Danielle Smith. Not that Canada didn't diversify. And when it had all this opportunity to diversify, we're so reliant on the Americans right now. And we could have markets in different areas and we wouldn't be so reliant. And this is poor policy that's been put in place, poor suppression of our resources, and just a bad policy. That's what we need to look in the mirror and accept responsibility for where we find ourselves.
100%. The one good thing I will say, I want to always like have a silver lining or a happy place or like something positive to say as well, because sometimes I listen to these back and I go, oh, Renee, you're a little bit too negative. But I do want to say one great thing about Brenda Bailey. She was present when I was debating the animation tax credit with then Finance Minister Katrine Conroy, as she was kind of sitting in the wings as the Jedi minister, and I will say that she has promised to actually reverse that decision by Katrine Conroy for the animation tax credit, and that has a huge positive impact on our downtown and on our tech industry, on our education industry. And I was just in Vancouver talking with an animator who was really looking forward to moving out to the Okanagan closer to her family, where she could actually find jobs again. And she was waiting for that animation tax credit. So I am eagerly anticipating and waiting for that bill to come to fruition and for us to see the budget and see that animation tax credit shifted. And I was actually in debate under our finance critic at the time, Peter Millibar, and I hope that he'll really carry that forward and laud Brenda Bailey for making that change and reversing course on that, because it does have a huge impact on us here. The other thing that I want to get back to on something you said about our leaders right now, and pitting one against the other. Our leaders right now are telling us that not everyone can thrive, that it's an either or, that it's if these people actually do well, you will suffer. And that's simply not true. In the world of economics, a rising tide does float all boats. And we actually have to see that as a positive. When we have a successful economy, when we have successful businesses, when we see prosperity coming, there are higher wages, higher incomes. Those, employees actually are the benefactor. We actually see the whole of a society being taken care of in a different way. And I just want us to get back to that hopeful message and to that hopeful signal that we all can thrive, that we all can be prosperous, and that it doesn't have to be so dog eat dog, sort of competitive or negative with that, and that rhetoric that's come from our political leaders really needs to stop.
And I will add to that by saying we are at the brink of an age of abundance. And one of the things that artificial intelligence and all these computers and all that stuff needs is energy. The number one component is energy. And we need that in everything that we do, everything we eat, everything we do every day. Energy is the key component to driving inflation down. Abundant energy, and boy, do we have a lot of it.
Electricity is the new gas, and also, water is the new oil.
And minerals is so important to computers and so important to everything and infrastructure and everything. And that's what we are so strong into. And one of the things I think this new election cycle is highlighting, Jagmeet Singh talking about our natural resources. Even the Liberals are now talking about our natural resources.
And carbon tax.
It's so much common sense. Canada is likely, I believe it is the richest resource nation in the world. And it's like we have a couple of Ferraris in the garage and we're riding around a scooter trying to virtue signaling, saying how great scooters are.
Yeah. I think we are and I really hope that we can make that shift. I was talking with one of my kids last night and they were saying, wow, like I can't believe everything that Trump did on day one. And I was like, that's how quickly it changes under a different regime.
Well,
and, we look at Argentina, they are posting one of the largest surpluses in 1 year after a new government. Now, don't get me wrong. There's like okay, not sure about that government, but a turnaround, right? A very dramatic shift in what's happening. And whether you look at Argentina with their financial aspects, or whether you look at Venezuela with their crime aspects, there are turnarounds that can happen when you have a government that takes those aspects seriously.
Key thing to ask you, because you've been in business for a long time and in government, we have if you have a company, you're taking over a company that's one of the richest company in assets in that, do you not want a CEO that knows how to deploy those assets and utilize them?
Absolutely.
And I think that's what's been missing.
100%.
Yeah, and I think that's where we'll leave it. We definitely need, in my mind, a Canada first federal government that puts Canadians first, and that we take the taxes, the revenues that we need from our natural resources, not shaking our citizens up and down to get the last penny out of. And our tax rates are high. People can't pay their bills. Inflation is crazy. Like, it's time for Canada first.
100%. It was interesting. I was down in the States, and I was golfing with some Americans, and they were talking about Trump, and I was shocked to hear that they were huge Trump supporters. And so I just curiously said, well, why? And they said, I said, he seems like such a bully to us in Canada. And they said, yeah, but he's our bully.
Yeah,
and I think that right now what Canadians want and need is someone who's going to be our bully, someone who's going to stand up to other world powers, who's going to negotiate, who's going to create those trade alliances. And under Stephen Harper, we had, he was a prime minister with the most amount of trade agreements signed under his tenure. I think we need that again, where we have on a global stage someone who is respected, someone who is honored, someone who is feared in a little way, and someone who has something like our natural resource sector to start negotiating with.
How about when our ministers go abroad, less on the alcohol bills and more on getting stuff done?
Yeah, less piano playing and a little bit more negotiating.
I would say we need people that are ready to go to work. And I guess we can leave it at that. Lots going on, though, right? Lots
going on.
I'm sure next week there'll be a lot more going on. And I do believe that what where Trump's popularity comes from is because he talks to the people because they get something. It's America first, and Americans want America first, just as Canadians should want Canada first.
Yeah, one thing, if nothing, Trump is consistent.
There you go. And we'll leave it at that. And we do thank you for watching Kelowna Now.
Have a great week.